Hi, this is Fiona from Studio Sci-Fi. In this tutorial, we'll talk about how to use ZFighter in detail. We'll go over the detection settings, issues list features, overall workflow efficiency, and some general tips for addressing ZFighting in your Unity scenes. I'm going to assume you've already watched the Getting Started video, which goes over how to install ZFighter and initialize your scene. I've already set up the scene to work with ZFighter a little bit, so here's some things you might want to do to make viewing your scene easier. First of all, enable Always Refresh. That will let you see the ZFighter material blink. Adjust your lighting for best viewing. This is a horror game, so the in-game lighting is very dark, hard to see things. So I've cleared out the light baking and let us enable the lighting so that we can see this editor-only directional light I've put in just to make everything nice and bright. If you're going to use ZFighter volumes, you'll need to be able to see your gizmos. So if I turn my gizmos on, there's my ZFighter volume, but I have a whole lot of other clutter. So I'm going to clear that up by just turning off everything. Let's not see all of these 3D icons and making sure we can see our ZFighter volumes, which would be here or maybe in your recently used right there. Okay. Lastly, you might want to adjust your view. I've got it in shaded now. Sometimes when you're looking at individual issues, shaded wireframe might be pretty handy so you can see your actual polys. Let's leave it at shaded for now. So at this part in the process, what we're trying to do is see the scope of what we're working with. So I'm going to run a process scene just on the whole thing with the default settings to see where we are. It processed this scene in a little under 12 seconds, and it found over 3,000 issues. Looking at what we have here, I can already tell that our water is a problem. So the water in the basement. Now I know that our trigger material is actually an invisible material, so I don't actually need to look at ZFighting for it. Okay, so let's find that material for this water. That's this water volume material here. In the inspector, there's the material. Let's go back to ZFighter and go into the settings area. And this is where we can start to limit what we actually process. Let's talk about the exclusions section. So the first thing we want to do is add that material to our materials ignore list. Next time we process, anything with this material will not be included. That's great. Okay, now are there any meshes that we might want to ignore? I happen to know in this project we've got some meshes that are books, and I know they're causing some issues, but I don't want to deal with that right now. So let's just get rid of those. So let's filter by mesh, and these were called books. Okay, so all of those assets that we combined, let's select all of them, drag and drop that onto the heading here of our ignore meshes. Okay, and now game objects, if there's any specific game objects that I want to ignore, I can also add them here. Other things that you can do to exclude, LOD groups, I'll go over those in a second. Tags and layers, we default exclude editor only. You can also make your own layers and put those in as exclusions. Renders are on by default. Mesh renders, you can also check skinned mesh renders, sprites, and canvases. I suggest if you do those last two that you look at the documentation for details. How do you get to the documentation? Easy. Click the documentation button. That will open the documentation page in your browser. Lots of useful things here. In the guides, the tips section contains a lot of the content I'm going to go over in this tutorial, so I suggest you check that out. Let's get back to those LOD groups. Let's talk about LODs. We don't have any in this scene, so let's look at a scene that does. Here we have a demo scene of a very nice asset pack. So let's take a look at this in a little more detail. Let's turn off the lighting so we can just see our meshes a little more clearly. This asset pack heavily uses LOD groups. What's a LOD group? This is a Unity component that basically controls what meshes you view at a certain distance so that you can have less polygons for a nice open scene like this when you're far away. You can see that by grabbing this camera and kind of zooming in and out. It shows you at which point the LOD 1, LOD 2, LOD 3 are visible, okay? So we probably don't care about ZFighting if you're really far away, as well as this controls that only one set of meshes is visible at a time, so you can't really ever have player viewable ZFighting within a LOD group. That's why this ignore LOD self intersections is on by default. let's see what happens if I process it with it off. All right, well, that lit up pretty much our entire scene. This is not useful. Let's clean that up. Let's clear the issues. Start over by ignoring LOD self-intersection. So now we will only check between two separate groups. Okay, so let's process the scene now. So that went a ton faster. The previous process was like 16 seconds. This one was about 5. And also, we've only got about 125 issues. Oh, that's a whole lot better. Let's see what we're looking at. Okay, well, I can kind of see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so. But we have 125 issues. What's going on there? Let's take a look at one. Okay, so there's definitely Z-fighting happening, but why do we have so many issues and yet so few highlights? If we look at this cliff wall, and we look at this cliff wall, we can see that what it's doing is it is checking the LOD 0 against LOD 0, 1, 2, 3 in this one. This is only one issue. It's only happening here, and your player's really only going to see it when they're up close to it, which is the LOD 0. So let's go back to our settings and let us only consider LOD 0 intersections. So I do not care if this object is at LOD 0, this object's at LOD 1, if there's going to be Z fighting. If your LOD groups have different viewing distances assigned to them, you might not want to check that, otherwise you may miss some issues. In this case, all their LOD groups are pretty much set up the same. They're prefabs. I'm going to check this. Let's clear our issues and start again. Okay, as we can see, there's only 7 in the entire scene. Not bad. And all of them are unique. No duplicates. Back to the other scene. Let's do a process with these meshes and materials excluded and see what we end up with. Since our first one was kind of a test, I'm going to go ahead and use the clear issues button. This just clears all the issues. Any annotations you have, any tags, statuses will be eliminated if you do that. Clearing all data will also reset all of these settings and remove any volumes and the ZFighter scene data here. You'll have to reinitialize. Only use this when you want to get rid of everything, okay? Otherwise, if you just want to start your issues over from scratch, you can use this button. All right, now let's process the scene. Okay, just by excluding those materials and game objects, we went from about 12 seconds to about 9 seconds. And we've only got about 1,500 issues, so we have more than halved the number of issues that we had. Already doing great. However, this is still a scene with a lot of levels, as you can see, and I don't necessarily want to be working on all of those at the same time, so let's break it up. Let's figure out how to do that. Go back to the settings, and we can use our volumes. Our volumes dictate what chunk we're gonna work on at any given time, okay? So, I've already set up a few volumes, so let's check this box to use our volumes, and let's turn on our gizmos so that we can see our boxes. When you click on them, you can see them, or if you have them selected here, you can see them, okay? If they're not selected, you won't be able to see them unless you click on them directly. All right? In order to add a volume, just click that, it adds one, and then I'm gonna focus on it. Now I can come here and scale it around like this, scoot it with a transform, like that. And then you can use these to just define whatever area you want to work on at any given time. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that one because I've already got these set up. What I have set up is I have a basement, which is just this whole area down here. Let's go into ISO view so we can see that a little bit better. I have a ground floor, I have a second floor, and then I have kind of a temporary one, which if I'm only working on like one room or one small area and I want to do spot checks, I can just grab this and move it to that room that I'm working on just to make sure that I'm not introducing Z fighting if I do some small edits, okay? So for now, let's just do the second floor volume. So let's select that, process volumes is on. Remember we had about 1,500 issues. Those issues will stay there unless we hit the clear issues button. So I'm not gonna hit clear issues because I want to retain all of the other issues. I only want to filter the ones that are contained within this volume for now. So I'm gonna do a process scene, Volumes are going to update only the data within that volume. It won't delete the other data, but that data will be marked as out of date. Now, you can see our issues list is a lot shorter, and we've only got highlights in that top floor right there. Let's talk about this sensitivity section here. You can leave these at defaults for most projects and you'll probably be fine. ZFighting is essentially a precision issue, and Unity is floating point precision. Some mobile devices and some VR headsets will be running on hardware that has less precision than what you are seeing in your editor on your PC. So you might need to take that into account when you set your sensitivity. And also there's other best practices that you should do within Unity to reduce the occurrence of ZFighting in general. Some of those are, if you've got cameras, you want to set your clipping planes to be a narrow range as possible. So the defaults here, 3 millimeters and 1,000 meters. If you have a much longer vista, you want to be able to see further and set this really far out, you might start to see some ZFighting occurring that you wouldn't if your camera range was narrower. Also, make sure that your scene is centered around your origin as much as possible, so 0, 0, 0. If you are really far away from the center of your scene, you will see flickering and additional ZFighting. This is often referred to as far from zero problems. Keep things centered around the origin of your scene. And then finally, this is one that took us a while to learn. Keep a shallow hierarchy and reduce the rounding errors you get with your parents' transforms. So let's take a look here at our inspector. We've got our ground floor and we have this lamp. All right, so you can see the lamp is up here and we want this lamp to be precisely placed right where it is. And so we've got to transform it, but it's gonna have parents. So this furniture, the spawn room, and then spawn. Our spawn does have a transform because that says where our spawn is in our relative scene, but then our ground floor is at 0, this is at 0. That reduces the amount of rounding errors you get because every time you have a child that translates its transform, you're going to introduce some problems. We saw a lot of this with gaps and overlaps, especially between modular assets. So for example, if you've got a couple of walls here that are snapped together and they have a different parent, even though they seem like they're snapping together, the rounding errors introduced by having different parents to different transforms can cause ZFighting and gaps and issues like that. Going back to ZFighter, these two settings here, the first one is distance. That's how far apart two planes are before we consider it ZFighting. What we've got here is balanced. If you need to catch more things, you might want to set it to broad. That will slow down your processing time slightly. Narrow, if you're seeing too much that isn't real ZFighting, it's not causing a problem, you can set it to narrow, also reduces your processing time slightly. The next one is angle. So if you have two polygons that are not quite parallel, but they're close, you might still see some ZFighting issues. And we have that set to narrow right now, but you can bump that up to broad and catch more things. It will significantly increase your processing time. So if you want to play around with these, optimize the processing time and the precision for your project, you can do that for most projects. I would start with the defaults. Now it's time to talk about our issues list. So let's just go through this tab from top to bottom and talk about all the settings that we have in here. View options. There's two places where you can hide and show everything. So in your view options, you can hide everything so you don't have those flashing, or you can show everything. Those are also down here in the issue details. You can hide all or show all. Focus will then focus just on that one issue. So if we select this issue and focus, it's only going to show that one and hide the rest of them. If you do show all here, hide, show, same thing. It'll show everything, but most of the time you're probably going to be working in focus mode as you deal with one issue at a time. Next thing that you can control is the colors of these. Orange is the front face. That's the one you're most concerned about ZFighting. Yellow is the back face. So that kind of gives you, oh, that's the back of whatever's going on here. If you have a scene that you can't see very well, you can change these. You can change this color. You can make it more or less opaque. You can change the hue. Let's kind of look at the front face here. You can change the front and back separately. So here I've kind of turned it into a green. Anything that makes you view it better in your scene. If you want to set it back to defaults, just go to revert. You can change your blink speed. I tend to crank mine up a little bit, or you can turn it off so they just stay solid. Column view. So now we're talking about the issues list itself. column view is basically how we are sorting. Are we sorting by number, which is basically the index which was created, priority, issue, etc. So we can sort here. Let's sort by size. You can toggle it, sorting up or down right there. You can also do that by clicking directly on the columns. I love this. I use this all the time. I just click right on the column and sort it how I want. Sort up or down by clicking, sort up or down by clicking, just like that. You can also change which columns that you can see. So here, these are the defaults. You can also add your data column. Now, do you remember when we were doing volumes, I said all the things that are outside of a volume aren't going to be processed? Well, that is what the data property is talking about. Check the documentation for more details. Basically, was this issue included in the last process? It'll be marked current. If it was partially included, for example, the volume sort of split the mesh a little bit, it may be marked partial, like it is right here. And if it wasn't included, it'll be marked in outdated. You'll see that we don't have any outdated, and that's because those are hidden by default. You can also have a notes column. That is your field right here. You may want to use that, for example, to assign to specific team members. So for example, Fiona needs to deal with this one. I'll go ahead and put that in there. And then you can sort by that column as well. Also in this view options section, we have a filter for your issues. So that is our show hide properties. Any given issue has a number of properties. We have priority. You can assign that right here to a given issue. So let's say that, let's pick just the top issue in our list, and let's give that a high priority. Let's give this next one a low priority. So for example, if I only want to sort and only see things by highest priority, let's just click nothing and then high. So we'll only see things that have high priority in the list with this particular view. Let's go back to everything. Status. Status is where are you in your workflow with a given issue. So if you want to mark it as it needs to be fixed, it is fixed, or what kind of issue it is, you can use your status. And then you can sort by all of those. So for example, if I've got a mesh issue on a lot of these, I might want to mark that to say, I've looked at it, I noticed that this is a mesh, give it to the artist to fix in a 3D program. And then you can hide mesh issues from your issues list. Issue type. So our types are everything, pair, and self. Let's talk about what those are. Pair. So a pair is you have two objects that are interfering with each other. Let's focus on this one so you can see. Do you see we have two objects in our scene that are overlapping, and that's a pair. The other type is self. So let's see if we can find a self. All right, here we go, this wardrobe. So this one, if you see here, there's only one object. That's because the ZFighting is within the mesh. It is contained within one object. Self issues typically can't be fixed in Unity. You'll probably have to open that up in your 3D modeling program and fix it there. So you can hide all of those by issue type. So for visible status types, by default, we don't show you outdated data. You can turn that back on if you want to see everything at once, even if it wasn't included in the most recent process. So let us collapse that for now. Let's talk about how you find issues from your list in your scene, issues in your scene, in your list. So we have all of these flashing overlays here, and we have all these issues here. How do we connect them together? If you select an issue, you can hit the focus button, and it's going to zoom right to where that issue is in your scene view. For example, if I click on the left door, you can use the focus button, or I can also double click to do the same behavior. Also, you can do it the other way around. So let's select off that issue. If I see this flashing in my scene and I say, which issue is that? If you click on it, it will select the issue. Keep in mind, right here, we've clicked something, but it's actually gotten the prefab parent. So you might need to click through until you actually get the object that's involved, and then we will highlight the issue right here. Another thing you can do is scene selection. So for example, if I see there's stuff going on here, but I'm not really sure what, I can do kind of a group select like that, and then hit scene selection, and it will tell me what issues are involved in any of the objects that I've selected there. So here we've only got one. If I clear that selection like this, let's go somewhere else. Like over here, I can see there's a bunch of stuff over here. Do a scene selection. Lots of objects selected, and you can see there's a number of issues that were in that group selection right there. Okay, So that's how you find your issues, one way or the other way. Another thing you might want to do is a search. So by default, all of our issues are named by the game objects that are involved in that issue. You may also have edited these. So for example, if I want to edit this one, I could call this major issue, please fix, right? And then if I just search by major, it's gonna pop up any issue that has that name. So for example, if I want to find everything that involves the wardrobe, I've got lots of issues with wardrobes. They all show up in this search. Let's hit X and clear that search. Now I know by now you're probably antsy to actually start going through this list and fixing some things. You may want to start at the top of your list and just work your way down. That's a totally valid approach, but with a list this long, it makes sense to have a triage step. Think about what kind of work needs to get done, who's going to do that work, and when, and in what order, and how much time you have to do all this. Let's say you're on a deadline. You might have some issues that aren't worth fixing right now. We're going to look for similarities of issues, group address them, and break this down into chunks. So right now I've got the full issues, the whole scene has been processed. So let's see some various strategies you can have to do your triage. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by type. I want to find everything that is a self issue. A self issue is one that can't be really fixed in Unity most of the time. You'll probably have to fix it in Blender or Maya or some other 3D modeling program. So I don't want to see these in my list. And as you can see, we have quite a lot of them. So I'm just going to select them all. Oop, a little bit further. And I'm going to mark them as mesh issue. And then I'm going to go up into my view options, issue types, and I'm going to remove self so that we don't see those. I could have also done that instead with statuses. So I could, let's hide anything that is a mesh issue. Another thing we might want to do is sort by size. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll see all your zeros. Now, those aren't necessarily zero. If you hover over, you can see what the real size is. Some of them are very, very small, but kind of at the top of the zero list, like right over here, you'll see, 0.000465. So if we zoom in on that, let's see if that's actually a problem. Just barely. You can see it looks like these ceiling tiles aren't really lining up. But you know what? The player's never going to notice that. I don't need to waste my time trying to snap those together perfectly right now. Maybe I'm under a deadline. So I'm not really too worried about anything that actually says 0. We have a shortcut for you. It's called the auto dismiss section. And the auto dismiss section, anytime you do a process and you have issues that are smaller than a certain size, in this case defined as 0.001, you can batch dismiss them with this button. So I'm gonna say, sure, I don't want to investigate all of those. They're all tiny. They're probably not going to be a big deal. They won't be distracting to the player. Dismiss. Already got rid of a whole big chunk. That's great. It also has, if you have deleted or missing objects, you can dismiss those issues as well. Within our issue names, right, we do have the game objects named by default. So I'm going to search for some and see where am I seeing kind of the same things popping up a lot. So I see a lot of stuff that's happening here. So let's go all the way up to the top, and this left door, what might that be? That's popping up a lot. So if I kind of look at this one, all right, I remember that's part of a prefab. Great way to batch fix issues. So in this case, let's look for everything that is called left door. All right, that's all of these issues right here. I'm gonna edit this prefab. So I could do this right now, or I can take these, mark them as prefab issue, and then go on and then fix them later. Another way that we can triage, go through and see, is there anything that's exact same size? Look at this, we have all these water quads that are exactly 4 meters of overlap. That sounds to me like, and if we hit the object button to select the object, hit the object button to select the other object, yeah, it's just a duplicate. We have a bunch of duplicates, and I bet these are all kind of in a row, aren't they? Yep, looks like it. So these we can probably group together and address by fixing them all at once. So you might, when you do your fixing, you might want to go in here. You can mark them as scene issue, for example, which means that we have to go and delete it within the scene. It's not part of a prefab. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and actually start fixing some stuff. So if we double click on this one, if we select the two objects, all right, so it looks like we've got a duplicate. So I'm gonna take this one and delete it. And then if we click this issue and then do a recheck, it's gonna do a mini process of just that one issue. It won't update all of the other issues, and it won't mark their data as outdated, but it will just check that one. If you do a number of rechecks, it's a good idea to every so often go back and process your scene again, just to make sure that you haven't changed some issues inadvertently in the process of your fixing. All right, so now you see that this is now 0. I can dismiss this in a couple of ways. If something is truly 0, the problem is fixed, I like to use the dismiss button. Right here, just hit a dismiss. Sometimes you might end up with one like this. So let's go over here to Tentacle Quad. What are these? Oh, we've got these like blobby horror monsters here, and they have what's basically just a quad with a cutout texture on the floor. I know that in practice, the players do not perceive any flickering with this because it's a transparent and a solid color. There's no real issue. So I'm gonna say these are fine. We don't need to fix this. So anywhere where there's a tentacle quad, I'm gonna mark all of these as won't fix. That just means I'm aware they exist, but I'm not gonna fix them. The reason I use won't fix instead of dismissed, if you want to look later to see what were the won't fixes and what were the dismissed, then you know which ones actually went to 0 and which ones still exist, but you've said, I don't care about this, in case you want to go back and check your work. Otherwise, they're functionally the same. All right, next one. Okay, remember these are prefab issue. How do we batch fix that one? So first, let's find all of those left doors. So let's do left. Okay, we've got all of those together. Let's go to our prefab and fix it there. So here's our roadblock door. I'm gonna open this prefab and let's see, there's our left door, and look, there's another left door. So I'm gonna delete this whole parent game object. So I'm gonna save this prefab, exit back out, go back to ZFighter, and then let's do a recheck of all of these so you can batch check them. And you can see all of those went to 0, which means that we've fixed it. So I'm gonna go ahead and give them a dismiss. All right, let's look at this one. Here, looks like we have this issue. In order to see this and whether it's a problem for our players or not, I'm gonna go ahead and hide all and kind of move it around. Yeah, I can definitely see some flicker there. And if I look over here, yep, hide all again, I can see some flicker there. So these two are definitely causing a problem. So let's see if I can find that piece and scooch it a little. And this one, scooch it a little. Now I could do a recheck right now, but I'm gonna kind of do those in batches because after you do one at a time, it can kind of slow things down. So I know that I fixed those, and since I'm going in order of my list, I'll just kind of do them in batches. So the next thing is let's look at these water quads. I bet these are all duplicates because it says 4 exactly. So if I look over here, for example, let's select one of the objects, so like this one, right here. And if I scoot it, oh, you can see one is left behind. If I scoot the other one, yep, that was the whole thing. Notice the overlay does not move with the object. The overlay is only calculated during a process or a recheck. You won't see it move if you move your thing. To see that update, you do need to do a process or a recheck. Okay, so let's put that back where it was. And then this guy, let's delete it. So I'm just gonna quickly do that for all of these. Select the object, and we're going to delete that object. We can now batch select all of these and check them again. All right, so as you can see, they all went to 0. Since they're fixed, I'm gonna give them a dismiss. And moving on. Okay, and now let's do this wall. Aha! These are some of my favorite issues. Anywhere where you have a mismatch of modules, go ahead, cover it up. In fact, I have an entire section of game objects that are just for covering up Z-fighting mistakes. I called it Pillars to Hide My Sins. So that's this right here. And as you can see, this is full of pillars that are just covering up gaps between modules that didn't quite line up. All of these. There's no shame in that. You will hide Z-fighting with pillars, with rugs, with door thresholds, decorative objects, paintings. Go ahead and do it. So let's mark these as won't fix. And then let's go ahead and do a recheck on all of these. Okay, and then we can dismiss those 5 issues. All right, so here's one. It looks like we have some paper. Now, it looks like the material for this either isn't correct or it's hidden under the rug. I'm not sure which, so let's investigate. Let's find where this is, and I'm gonna scoot it up a little bit. Ah, it was just hidden under the rug, but it looks like it was also duplicated. So if I look at this one, oh, there it is. You know what? Let's just keep it. Let's just rotate it a little bit and put it somewhere else. Kind of stick it over here on top of the rug like that. And scooch it down. One thing that you might find is if you have perfectly flat items on top of a perfectly flat item, such as pieces of paper like this, it's going to be really hard to get those just above the surface of whatever they're sitting on so that they're not Z-fighting, but also make it not look like they're floating. A great way to fix this, if you have this modeled, take each one of these, put a vertex in the center, right? So that this one has probably got a few tries on it. Let's look at the shaded wireframe. Okay, see how this one, all the vertices are on the outside and they're probably all in a plane. Anything like that, if you just put a vertex in the center and lift that one up a little bit, it'll solve a lot of your problems. So that way you don't have them parallel and it gives it a little bit of depth so that you can avoid the Z-fighting, while at the same time your player probably won't notice that it's not perfectly flat, okay? You are gonna find that sometimes the hardest thing about ZFighter is finding exactly where is the Z-fighting. It'll say these 2 objects are Z-fighting, but you can't find that overlay. A key thing is using that focus button. That focus button will take your overlay and fit it within the screen. So in this case, I can fix that by just scooching it over a little bit. That's good. But in other cases, for example, if you have 2 walls that are just barely overlapping on their edges, you may not see the flickering overlay. You may not see that because it's just so thin. It's a really long straight line. Let's go down and see if we can find an example of that. Okay, so here we've got 2 large walls with an overlap of 1 millimeter. Okay, so that's these. And you can see there's barely a line there. And that might be kind of hard to see, right? So if you do a focus, it's going to show you that in the center of your screen. And then if you kind of go from another angle, get that whole thing in from another angle and then do a focus, you may be able to narrow down on exactly where it is and find out what the overlap actually is. Okay, so in this case, these are probably just not snapped together correctly. So if you don't know this trick, I'm going to teach you something really useful right now. If you have an object selected, use your transform, make sure that that's active. You might need to scooch it a little bit. Hold down V for vertex, V for vertex. Pick a vertex on there, and one that's really nice to easy to match up to the other one. Hold down V, grab, and it will snap, right? So you can see it's snapping to different places, and you can snap different vertices. So if I want to snap this bottom floor one right here to that one right there, hold down V and snap it. Great tool. So here's a good example of a fix that I just did. I thought I'd snapped it together, but I did not actually get the snap right, so it still has a little bit of a gap. So I did a recheck. But also, I just want you to note that when you do a recheck, I usually do a save just because I want to make sure I save my scene often and it's a good reminder. You don't have to. If you do a recheck and you recheck the issue without saving, it takes a lot less time. So you're saving, in this case, this was 0.3 seconds without saving. Let's do a recheck with saving. And that was almost 6 seconds. So about 5.5 seconds are just Unity saving this scene. If you want to go fast and do quick rechecks, do it without saving. Just remember to save now and then. Okay, let's take a look at this issue. So for example, this one is a lever handle that is part of an animated component, and they're both visible in editor mode. During runtime, it's controlled by an animation, which one is visible or not. So in this case, I don't want to delete one because we need that at runtime. So when you are going through your list, pay attention to what you're fixing to make sure you're not causing yourself more problems by not understanding what you're actually working with. So another good habit, if you have doors in your scene, these are often the boundary to something. So for example here, let's temporarily disable this door. Doors are usually a good place to have breaks in your floor. So if you've got a tiled floor, sometimes it's hard to keep that tiling going because it kind of adds up errors as you go along. Have a threshold in your doors. That way you can hide little errors like these floors overlapping in your scene. Here's another tip. If you have things that go together in corners like this, for example, anytime you have trim or something that sticks out horizontally, if you put these together, you're going to get little squares of Z fighting in this corner that is going to be visible to your players and is very annoying. I don't have those, and the reason is because I learned a long time ago that the way you avoid that is you always angle your trims. Okay, so never have a flat surface right here. You always want to angle them slightly so when the corners go together, they dive under each other and you don't end up with Z fighting. One thing that you may notice that you have a lot of, for example, is if these walls have closed tops. These ones don't, but if they had closed tops, you're going to get a lot of issues that are just your walls overlapping on the tops where no one can see it. A lot of times those will have the same size, so you can kind of select all of them and mark them as won't fix because they're the same size usually, or you can batch select them by selecting in the scene. So here, for example, I have things which are kind of all pretty much the same issue. Batch select and deal with them all at once. Okay, here's a section where I have a whole bunch of tiles for the ceiling, and I moved some around, but it seems to have created problems elsewhere. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a process scene to make sure I'm up to date on all the data. Then with all of these selected, I'm going to do a scene selection so I can see what issues are involved here. So it looks like we've only got one out of place. Okay, so it looks like we've got an issue right between these two. So in theory, that means if I grab those two together and I scooch them and snap them correctly, hopefully that will fix all those issues. So let's go ahead and process the scene again. Okay, and then we will select all of these and then do another scene selection. Okay, no more issues. Great. Okay, so we fixed everything in that roof. All right, so here's a case where I had moved some stuff earlier to try to fix one issue, and in the process I made another issue. And so rather than trying to deal with that and trying to figure out how to make all these add up, I just have this puddle. Let's make the puddle bigger. So if I hide these, that puddle is semi-opaque, it's gonna have reflections on it, covered it right up. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark that one as won't fix. Okay, now that I've kind of got down to these 5mm issues, I'm starting to get into like tiny little edges and gaps that may not be worth my time to fix. So I might decide to just kind of quit here and say everything below here I'm not gonna bother with, but I'm just gonna zoom through each one, double click it just to make sure there's not any of them that I think is actually gonna be a problem. Okay, after scanning through most of these, I'm gonna just batch dismiss them all. So now that we have cleared the whole project of all of the Z-fighting issues that we care about, we may want to remove all of the Z-fighter stuff from your project. And you don't have to do that. All of these things are, in fact, editor only, so they won't be included in your build. But if for whatever reason you want to remove it, we have a very easy way, which is just to clear all data. It will sort through your hierarchy, find all the Z-fighter components, and remove them. It will delete all of your issued data, all of your notes, statuses, anything that you have done. So only do this as sort of a last resort, or if you really want to start from scratch. Just clean it up, clear all data, and all of that is gone. So that's it for our tutorial. I hope that that was helpful. All of that information plus more is contained in our documentation, so please do check that out. We hope you enjoy working with ZFighter.